Tom, fascinating talk. Enjoyed every bit of it. Boy, do we have lots of questions. So I'll keep the slides up there because a lot of these questions are specific to the slides, and I'll try to guide you to the questions, the slides that were the questions were asked about. So first, if you go to page 8 in your deck.
Page what, Jay?
8. Page 8.
Okay.
We got a question about yeah, right
there it is.
That's it. Okay. So relating to this slide right here, should one look at the variance as well as the expected number of strokes? So you've got the expected number of strokes there. What about the variability from
that's a great question. The answer is, if you are a risk neutral golfer, that is, that you would make your choices according to the expected or probability weighted strokes to hole out, then no, you should not include the variance, because on average you will do better if you use the probability weighted strokes to hole out over a lot of shots, like a couple of hundred that you would have in a tournament. Having said that, you would take the variance into account if you're risk averse, and that was the last example I showed with the match play. But for most golfers in most situations, 95% or more, using the expected number of strokes to hole out is probably the best metric.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to slide 20 now.
Okay, slide 20.
Yep. And this.
Here we go.
Yeah, and that one right there, where you got your 9 points there. So the question is, could this be used to fit a meta log to errors of actuals versus a forecast, as in any forecast for any outcome or aim point?
Yes, I would certainly think so. I don't see any reason why not. I mean, what we're talking about here, the golf dispersion patterns are basically errors, right, relative to an aim point. I don't see any reason why this could not be extended to be used to look at and consider forecasting errors when actual information becomes available. I haven't thought about it carefully, but conceptually it would seem to make good sense.
Okay, now let's back up a slide to 19.
Okay.
And in this conditional distribution, Tom, I see that what you've got here is, regardless of whether you're 10 yards right on target or 10 yards left, the dispersion you've got on the X2 variable is the same. So the question is, does it need to be the same, or can you be tighter to the right than you are to the left, for example?
That's really a great question. That obviously comes from a knowledgeable golfer. The answer is yes. The answer is no, it does not need to be the same dispersion. If you wanted, you could say, okay, when I'm 10 yards right, it's 0 to -5, which would be less dispersion. When I'm 10 yards left, it's 8 to -6 or something like that. Absolutely. This, and in fact, I even thought about making the example that way, and I just didn't do it for reasons of, wanting to make this equation as simple as possible. But absolutely, all of that detail can be put in there. And in fact, as I mentioned, you can move these points around wherever you want, and the multivariate meta logs will just adjust themselves accordingly. You just need to specify the rule that, according to which that behavior occurs. That's all.
Okay. Here's an interesting question from OJ, and I was actually thinking about this myself, Tom. How do you adjust the aim point for weather conditions?
Okay.
Playing on a blustery day.
Okay, let's go back to this this last here. There are a couple of ways. One is, if the weather conditions are wet or dry, if the course is very wet, a ball is likely not to bounce and roll. It just lands where it does and sticks right there. In that case, that basically reduces the size of your shot dispersion pattern. Not this much, not as much as I'm showing here, but it basically reduces a little bit. If the course is very hard and dry, it increases your shot dispersion pattern because the ball hits and rolls. So that's one way you would take it into account. The other way is, suppose there's a strong wind blowing. Suppose there's wind that's blowing 15 miles an hour from, let's say, left to right. Well, that's going to be blowing your shot strongly toward the hazard while it's in the air. Well, in that case, naturally, and of course, you would want to adjust your aim point farther left of the hole to take into account how much the wind might move your shot.
Okay. So here's an interesting question from Brian. On the example you gave us, you got a par 3. But let's say you're on a par 4 instead, and you're on the tee. And as you're thinking about your shot dispersion for your tee shot, should you also be thinking about the subsequent shot dispersion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great question. And yes, this whole theory extends all the way back to all expanded drive. You're standing on the tee. And let's say you're standing on the tee on a par 4 hole and there's a water hazard on the right and it's relatively open on the left. Well, what you need to do is aim far enough left so that maybe only one chance in 20 would a ball go into the water hazard or out of bounds. For me personally, as a golfer, I would aim in that situation, maybe 35 yards left of the hazard, if the hazard's on the right. Other golfers might aim 40 yards left. Others might aim 20, depending on what their skill level is. Probably even most pros would aim more farther to the left than 20 yards. But the key, according to Mark Brody's book here, is that you can, with your shot dispersion pattern for a driver, you can do exactly the same analysis. You can put it out there 250 yards, 300 yards, wherever you hit your driver, and you can move it around and you can calculate the best aim point based on expected strokes to hole out from wherever that driver shot ends up. And golf courses can be mapped in terms of expected strokes to hole out for the whole landing area of drives. And in fact, they have been mapped for that. And your strokes gained, according to Mark Brody, this brilliant way of measuring is expected strokes from where you teed off, which might be on a par 4 hole, maybe it's a 4.2, okay, expected strokes to hole out, minus the expected strokes to hole out from wherever you end up. So maybe you ended up in a place where you're 3 strokes to hole out, minus 1 for your shot gives you a 0.2, if I did that math right, strokes gained on the field by hitting the drive into a particularly good location. But anyway, yes, the answer is this whole analysis applies to driving, to second shots, to layup shots on a par 5, because the whole courses can be mapped in this way, and golf dispersion patterns can be understood and modeled, as I've shown.
Okay. Here's an interesting question, maybe from an economist. You were talking about risk aversion and stuff. What if you weren't risk neutral about the number of strokes, but you were risk neutral about purse money?
That's a really great question. Prize money is heavily weighted toward the winner. The second and third place finishers don't get nearly as much, and then it declines rapidly from there. So it's very nonlinear. If one is risk neutral on prize money, then that would imply non-risk neutral behavior, I believe, in strokes, particularly coming down to the last few holes. For example, the leader could rightfully be slightly risk averse with respect to strokes over the last few holes. I just play a bit more conservatively. Similarly, a competitor who's just a stroke or 2 off the lead could rightfully be slightly risk preferring in strokes over the last few holes. I haven't really done that analysis, but I think it would likely come out that way. And as I say, it's a great and insightful question.
Okay, so we're almost at the top of the hour. So before I turn it over from Hilda, I'm just going to ask one more question that came in. It's kind of a cheeky one, Tom. Has your game improved since you started doing this?
That's a great question. Yes, it has actually. It's improved significantly since I've been learning all this, and I find it I obviously don't have all this stuff memorized when I tee off on every hole, but after you've done a few of these analyses, you get an intuition. And I actually just visualize my shot dispersion pattern when I'm standing up to the ball and think about where do I aim that given this situation. There's no doubt that that's helped me. My handicap's down at least 2 strokes.
Great. Well, thank you again, Tom, and I'll turn it over to Hilda to close things out.
Well, what a fun presentation. I'm not even a golfer and I loved it. Thank you, Tom, and thanks, Jay, for moderating. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's presentation. Again, I want to thank our presenters and you or your attendees for your contribution to today's event. I want to remind you that all our webinars are posted on the STP website in the library section. Thank you for being with us today, and you may now disconnect.